what we'll focus on this morning is the U.S. mainland, Canada, and Europe to the Caribbean. We'll take a look at legacy versus low-cost carrier capacity to the Caribbean, and then we'll take a look at Puerto Rico capacity within the Caribbean, particularly in Puerto Rico and just other intra-Caribbean flying. So overall, if we exclude intra-Caribbean capacity, the U.S. mainland accounts for about 61%. This is full year 2013 OAG data. So overall, the U.S. mainland compromises about 61% of the capacity to the Caribbean this year, followed by Europe at 17%, Canada at 10%, South America at 7%, and Central America at 5%. And as far as how the capacity to the Caribbean is allocated, the Dominican Republic accounts for 21% of the capacity to the Caribbean from all regions, Puerto Rico 17%, Cuba 10%, Jamaica 10%, and the Bahamas 7%. And then we've got Aruba with 5%, and every other island is or country is less than 5%. So the three largest markets in the Caribbean, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Cuba, account for about 48%, about half of the capacity to the Caribbean this year. As far as growth is concerned, so if we take a look at growth by region, overall the capacity to the Caribbean has increased about 25%. So if we index everything back to 1 in 2003, our total Caribbean capacity is up about 25% from the U.S. mainland, Europe, and Canada collectively. And then all other airlines from the U.S. mainland have about 8% of the capacity to the Caribbean. If we take a look at the number of Caribbean routes, what I did on this slide is that the green line represents the total legacy airline plus the low-cost carrier, LCC is low-cost carrier, number of routes to the Caribbean. And you can see overall in 2013, there are 303 routes from the U.S. mainland to a Caribbean destination. And what you can also see on this chart, what really sticks out is the low-cost carriers. The number of routes they operate to the Caribbean is up about 468% over the last 10 years. And the mainline carriers, the legacy carriers, the number of routes they're flying to the Caribbean is down about 9%. So even though your capacity is up 30%, all of that, the number of routes is up 30%, all of that growth has come from the low-cost carriers. And the low-cost carriers being JetBlue. In this analysis, I'm defining low-cost carriers as JetBlue, Southwest Airtran, Spirit, Sun Country, and Frontier. So as far as the number of new routes by carrier, JetBlue has added 50 new routes to the Caribbean since 2003, which is followed by Southwest and Airtran at 21, Delta at 19, Frontier at 13, Spirit at 11, and Sun Country at 5. You can see that American has dropped 17 Caribbean routes overall since 2003. U.S. Airways has dropped 13 routes, and United has dropped 8 routes. If we take a look at the amount of capacity operated by legacy carriers versus the low-cost carriers, you can see that 10 years ago, the legacy carriers were providing 94% of the capacity to the Caribbean, and today they're only providing 63%, less than 2/3 of the capacity to the Caribbean, whereas in 2003, the low-cost carriers provided 6% of the capacity to the Caribbean, and today they're providing well more than 1/3 of the capacity to the Caribbean. If we take a look at legacy carrier capacity, you can see that 10 years ago, American carried or had about 62% of the capacity in the Caribbean to the U.S. mainland, but they're down to 46% today, whereas Delta has come up from 11% in 2003 up to 23% of Caribbean capacity today. And then if we take a look at the low-cost carrier capacity, you can see JetBlue is really the big dog in the Caribbean, as we all know. From 33% of the low-cost carrier capacity in 2003 up to 71% today. And you can also see that Southwest and Airtran, while they took a bit of a hiatus in between 2003 and 2007, they're now up to 19% of low-cost carrier capacity. And then if we take a look at how the capacity is allocated from the U.S. mainland to Caribbean destinations, not surprisingly, Puerto Rico is the largest single market from the U.S. mainland to the Caribbean with 27% of the total capacity, followed by the Dominican Republic at 19%, Jamaica at 11%, and the Bahamas at 10%. So if we take a look at how the capacity has changed by island, I told you I was a data geek. If we take a look at how the capacity has changed by island or destination, you can see that the Dominican Republic has had the largest single increase in capacity over the 11-year period, with about 1.1 million seats per year added since 2003 to the U.S. mainland, where the Bahamas has lost about 600,000 seats per year to the U.S. mainland. And I think the other outlier here is to take a look at Puerto Rico. Since American closed its San Juan hub, Puerto Rico's capacity is down by about 360,000 seats per year. So, and then if we take a look at how the capacity is allocated by destination, by carrier type, you can see that Puerto Rico, low-cost carriers in Puerto Rico, in the aqua blue portion of the Puerto Rico bar to the far left of the chart, 54% of Puerto Rico's capacity is low-cost carrier capacity, only 46% is legacy carrier capacity. And then we've got about 10 islands that have some low-cost carrier presence, and probably 7 or 8 islands that don't have any low-cost carrier presence. So if we take a look at fares, and this is DOT domestic and plus international fare data that I used over the last 11 years. The average fare in green from the U.S. mainland to the Caribbean was $235 each way. That $235 does not include any taxes or fees, so we're just looking at pure fares in one way here. So the average fare to the Caribbean was $235, but if we segment that from into Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and other Caribbean, the average mainland fare to Puerto Rico, you can see, was only $174, whereas the average fare in 2013 to the rest of the Caribbean was $262. So Puerto Rico is a relative bargain relative to the rest of the Caribbean from a customer's perspective, and it's a function of JetBlue and other low-cost carriers. We said 54% of Puerto Rico's capacity to the U.S. mainland was from low-cost carriers. It's a function, Puerto Rico's low fares are a function of low-cost carrier capacity in Puerto Rico. If we take a look at the average fare, and I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but if we take a look at the average fare to the Caribbean, we said the average fare to the Caribbean is highlighted there in yellow at $235. We've got Puerto Rico at the extreme left at $174, and then we've got Anguilla. Anguilla's average fare to the U.S. mainland was $581. And the reason the average is skewed so far to the left, the yellow bar is skewed so far to the left, is because Puerto Rico and the Bahamas make up a large chunk of the total overall traffic to the Caribbean. So if we take a look at Canada, if we change direction here a little bit and take a look at Canada, you can see that Canada's capacity, as I mentioned earlier, is up about 500% since 2003. The real growth story in the Caribbean as far as traffic on a percentage basis is concerned has been in Canada. And the single largest Canadian market to the Caribbean is Cuba. We don't have that advantage in the mainland U.S. of the ability to fly to Cuba on a scheduled basis. And then the Canadians also like the Dominican Republic. So overall, Canada to Cuba and the Dominican Republic make up about 59% of the total Canadian Caribbean capacity, followed by Jamaica, Trinidad, and the Bahamas. If we take a look at what destinations have gained the most capacity over the last 10 years, you can see Cuba has gained the most Canadian capacity, followed by the Dominican Republic and Jamaica. Haiti and Bermuda have lost capacity to Canada. And then if we take a look at Europe, Europe's capacity to the Caribbean over the last 11 years is up about 15%. And as far as capacity by destination from Europe, the Dominican Republic, Cuba, and Guadeloupe account for about 55% of the total European capacity to the Caribbean. And it's interesting to see that both Guadeloupe and Martinique together, the French islands, make up about a quarter of the capacity from Europe to the Caribbean. Air France is very big, and the other French carriers are very big from Europe to the Caribbean, obviously. If we take a look at the way seats have changed over the last 11 years, the Dominican Republic, Guadeloupe, and St. Lucia have gained the most seats, and Bonaire, Puerto Rico, and Antigua have lost the most seats over the last 11 years. So if we take a look at where traffic originates in Europe to the Caribbean, France accounts for 36%. France is the single largest market with more than a third of the traffic. The UK accounts for about 26% of the traffic, followed by Germany and the Netherlands. Spain is number 9. Spain is actually more or less tied with the Netherlands with 9%. And then if we look at where capacity growth has come from, it's come from the UK. The United Kingdom has gained about 350,000, almost 350,000 seats over the last 11 years, followed by France. And Russia is a real up-and-comer as far as capacity to the Caribbean is concerned, and most of the Russian traffic is going to the Dominican Republic. But the Netherlands, Spain, and Italy have lost the most capacity to the Caribbean over the last 11 years. So, and then if we take a look at just what's happening in the Caribbean, things in the Caribbean have more or less, the capacity in the Caribbean, the intra-Caribbean capacity, if you will, has more or less stabilized at about 75 to 80% of where we were in 2003. There was a little bit of growth from 2003 to 2004, but it's come down. But I think the good news is it's probably stabilized. And the downtick you see from 2012 to 2013 is probably a reflection of American Eagle ending its operations in San Juan. So I think going forward, we're probably going to see this start to grow a little bit. But it's going to be tough to get back to where we were 11 years ago. And then if we exclude Puerto Rico from the capacity, we're at 87%. So just really within the Caribbean, excluding Puerto Rico, we're at 87% of our capacity. So again, we've got, and this next slide is really going to drive this point home. This is just Puerto Rico to the Caribbean. We only have 37% of the capacity we had 11 years ago from Puerto Rico to the rest of the Caribbean. So the downtick to 74% is really a function of Puerto Rico or the Caribbean losing so much capacity to Puerto Rico.